Welcome back to part 2 of creating a musky replica, where I'm going to show you how I paint a muskie once your blank is all assembled. This is one I got from Lake Country Replicas. I purchased it unassembled and showed the assembly process in part 1 in case you missed it. However, they can also be purchased completely assembled and all ready to paint. Once again, I will put a link to Lake Country's website below. Before starting this process, make sure you have some good reference photos of the muskie you are reproducing. Try not to get overwhelmed by looking at the entire fish, but instead concentrate on small areas at a time. At least this is what I like to do. I start by blacking out the entire fish. It's an antiquing process which brings out a lot of detail. I like to use lacquer paint for this step and use acrylics for all the others. I prefer to mix blue and brown together to give me a nice charcoal color, which is not as harsh as using regular black. Spray the entire fish, including the fins. Now I go over the entire fish with 4/0 steel wool. Then we just blow it off quick, and we're ready for the next step. Now I'm going to spray the belly white and partially up the fish. I'm going to use just enough to cover, but not enough to completely cover all the scale detail that we've created when we did our antiquing. And that's in the ballpark of what we're looking for. Next, I darken the back of the fish with the same color I used to antique it. Again, not too dark. I don't want to cover up my detail, just slightly. One thing you'll notice is that I'm painting outside. The reason being, when I retired, I gave up my workshop with my nice painting booth. So just make sure you paint with adequate ventilation and proper safety equipment for your own health. The next thing I like to do is spray some metallics. I use a gold over the back and a silver pearl along the belly. These are just the base coats before I actually start painting this fish. Now I spray the bottom half with a chrome pearl, avoiding the fins. Then a nice coat of pearl inside the mouth. The last step before I start adding color and detail is brush on a little bit of gold leaf metallic powder. It's a silver, and it gives it a nice reflective coat for your paint. I just work it in and then spray off the excess, seal it with a coat of lacquer. This step is completely optional, but it's just something that I like to do. Now I like to seal this whole thing in with a clear coat of lacquer. Now we're ready for the detail work. I switched to my detail airbrush and turned the air pressure down to 10 to 20 psi. I'm using a Badger Renegade airbrush, which has been a real workhorse for me for many years, although there are many others on the market that will do the job equally well. I'll start this fish with a thinned down scale detail green color, although all the colors used from this point on will depend on your reference photos of the fish you are trying to reproduce, as there are many different variations of muskies. I'm going to lightly start laying out my bar patterns. Lightly at first, and then I come over it and do individual scales to highlight them a little bit. I try to be somewhat erratic with my bar patterns. And as I get towards the rear of the fish, I turn up my intensity just a little bit, as that's the way most muskies are for some reason. I'm going over it, just giving a little more detail. That's the fun part of painting a fish. You can get it as detailed as you like. Every fish is different. And I continue my barring up into the back. Now we give the head a little detail. Again, according to your reference, keep checking that. Now, to make things just a little more subtle at this stage, I'm going to try a little steel wool just very lightly on the bottom of these bars. You could also spray a mist of white over top. Whatever it takes to get the job done. There's so many different ways of doing the same thing. There's no right or wrong. Next, I'm going to whiten up the belly just a little bit more with just white and mist it up the sides just a little bit. Little detail in the head. Now I'm going to go over that white with just a little more chrome pearl. And up the sides just a little bit. Now we're going to start giving our fish just a little bit of color. I'm going to start with a transparent yellow. And we'll just slowly work up to the color we want. Now on this particular fish, I'm going to go over it with a burnt umber just along the back, as that's what my reference photo shows me on this fish. And over the brown, I'm going to go with a sparkling gold pearl. Now I'm going to go over my barring once again, just add a little more detail. Now I'm going to start adding some detail to my fin rays with brown. I'm going to start off the base of the fins, spray a little green. And try to get a nice natural looking fin. Next I'm going to mist just a little yellow ochre, lighten them up just a little bit. Next I come in with some brown and put a few spots on as I see in my reference. And the last step for the fins, I use a sienna or a rust color. Just kind of blend it in. Use a little card to keep the overspray to a minimum. Now I come back with my white and just touch up any overspray and the leading edge of fins if you wish. Now this is optional, but I'm coming in with some of my iridescents. This is iridescent green. I'm just going to give it a light mist. Then a iridescent gold over the back, and we're getting close to this fish being done. Hey, Mama, you hungry? Now is when I do my fine detail. I start out with yellow ochre. I go around the eyes, the teeth, the vent. Then I follow that up with a sienna. And it's a nice subtle look. Then just a touch of brown to finish up the eye. Blending into the previous colors. And the last thing I like to do with this fish before the final gloss is a little scale tipping along the back with a gold powder. I just hit the tip of each scale or most of the scales. And I seal this in with a coat of lacquer, and it really gives the fish a nice look when it's done. And once you give it that coat of lacquer, it will be a more subtle look than it looks right now. And this fish here, just because I seen it on the reference, I decided to put 2 or 3 rows of blue iridescent powder. Now I go over the powders with a clear lacquer to seal them in. Now we're ready for the final step, the gloss coat. I'm using a 2-part automotive. We give it a quick flash coat, we wait about 10 minutes, and then give it a heavier final coat. Now we're ready for the final gloss coat. One thing I should point out, if you use the 2-part automotive type gloss, make sure you use the proper safety equipment. You want to wear a respirator and rubber gloves because it is some pretty toxic material, but the results are well worth it, I think.